In October of 2021, as cinema was just recovering from one of the darkest moments in its history, a new science fiction phenomenon gripped the pop culture zeitgeist by storm. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dune. Greetings, Designing Hollywood, movie fans, and beyond. I am your host, Oliver Ricketts. Today, as Dune 2 is about to rock the cinematic landscape, I'd like to take a look at its predecessor, a film that managed to be one of the best science fiction genre films to come out in an era where we predominantly only get science fiction genre films. And that film is, of course, Dune Part 1. Now, before we get started, folks, I'd like to introduce myself. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Oliver Ricketts, and I've been a documentarian and content creator here on YouTube for over 10 years, covering mainly films and pop culture. I love movies so much, and going to a theater is my favorite thing to do. And that's why I'm so excited to be here talking to you on the Designing Hollywood YouTube channel, where I'll be taking a look at some of the biggest and most exciting movies coming out in theaters today, as well as taking deep dives into some older classic films and telling you both why I love them so much and what their place is in cinematic history. And so if this is the kind of content that you need more of in your life, make sure that you subscribe to this channel and like this video so that you get all of our future episodes and you won't miss it when we cover your favorite movie. And by the way, if you have a favorite movie that you'd like us to cover, let us know down in the comments below. In Dune 2021, we follow the story of Paul Atreides as his family takes charge of the desert world of Arrakis. As Paul grapples with his destiny and Arrakis' fate, he faces political intrigue, formidable adversaries, and the overwhelming influence of the spice. And folks, at some point early on in 2021, I found myself back in a movie theater for one of the first times since the global pandemic. As the lights went down in the theater and the trailers came on, I remember seeing a bald, overweight man emerging from a pit of tar. There's screaming, there's chanting, and I have no idea what is happening. It's like that original teaser for The Lion King. I have no context to why these animals are gathered here. I just know something really important is going down. And there's just that general feeling that something wild is coming. Something that I've never seen before. And of course, this wasn't even the full trailer for Dune. This was the teaser to get us excited for the trailer, which would be dropping in a few weeks. It was only playing in front of this movie because theaters had just came back. There weren't that many trailers to show, period. But regardless, with this one simple image, I am hooked. I don't know what this movie is, but I need to be there opening day. And it seems that the rest of the general movie-going public felt the same as well. And again, consider the timeline and setting here. It's 2021, and so the movie industry is only just bouncing back from the chaos that was COVID-19. And theaters are starting to see some action again, but it's still touch and go. There's not a big general interest in going to the movies right now. People do not feel safe. They don't feel comfortable. We've been sitting in our house spoiled this entire time watching streaming. And every day we're waking up and reading articles in the major trades like Deadline and Variety telling us that movie theaters will never bounce back. Major chains like AMC and Regal are declaring bankruptcy and then taking it back. The entire future of movies is completely uncertain at this time, especially when you hold it up to 2019 when we're seeing movies like Spider-Man Far From Home and Avengers Endgame, which were movies that everybody had to get to the theater and see. Disney alone put out $10 billion movies that year. And now in 2021, it's a question if they'll ever be able to fill a movie theater ever again. It's now a big gamble to put out a big tentpole science fiction risky blockbuster. But amid all of this confusion, there is genuine excitement amongst the movie-going public for one big risky science fiction blockbuster. Despite the uncertainty, people are buzzing about this movie. And along with other films like Spider-Man No Way Home and The Matrix Reloaded, this is a universal answer for the question, what is the one movie you have to see? Which of course makes what happens next so strange. Because in December of 2020, Warner Brothers announced that their entire 2021 theatrical slate, including Dune and several other majorly anticipated blockbusters, would still be hitting theaters, but they would be coming out same day and date on their platform HBO Max, which is of course not to be confused with Max, the place you go for HBO. This isn't really unexpected. The whole industry has been struggling across the board with what movies should be coming out in a movie theater and what should be accessible to the public who is largely still stuck at home. And so to a lot of studios who have spent a lot of money making major blockbuster films in the last year before the pandemic, streaming and streaming subscribers seem like a really attractive option. But despite all that, this decision was majorly mocked by the industry almost across the board. In fact, many pundits in the movie review space, including John Campea and Dan Murrell, suggested this move might be enough to kill interest in the theatrical experience altogether. Because now you're training your audience to change their habits. Instead of running out to the theater to go see The Suicide Squad, they expect the movie will be available to them at home for free with the cost of their streaming subscription. And if it's not available, they'll just wait. And so it seems like a sure thing that day and date will be enough to kill theatrical interest in any movie that Warner Brothers has coming out in the year of 2021. Well, there's definitely validity to that argument, and I personally am a believer in the theatrical experience. I do think there's an argument to be made that in this one specific case, day and date streaming actually elevated the profile of Dune. Let me explain. As maybe you can tell by, the way my voice sounds, I'm from Long Island, New York. And specifically, I've spent a lot of time on the South Shore, Lindenhurst, Bayshore, Amityville. Breweries on weekdays and Saturdays are for Gilgo Beach and Jimmy Buffett. And what I'm getting at here is that this area has its very own subculture. And to be honest, movies don't really play a part of that subculture. At least not in any major way. For instance, sure, you might get your buddies together to go see the new Avengers movie, or maybe you heard Oppenheimer goes absolutely hard and you have to see it, which is true. But in this area, there are not a ton of people whose lives revolve around movies, at least not to the level of many of us here in this online space. And as such, it's really easy to tell when a new movie has really scratched the surface of public interest. And so when Dune hit both HBO Max and theaters on the same day, I can actually recount 3 different times that I was approached in a social situation during that weekend and asked if I had seen or was going to see Dune. In fact, multiple people who I know personally do not go to the movie theaters told me they watched the movie at home and liked it so much that now they were going to go see it the way it was meant to be seen in the movie theater. And I realize this is mainly anecdotal evidence, but I cannot stress to you enough how little this happens in my day-to-day life for non-superhero blockbuster fare. And definitely not for really weird, really dense science fiction. While many pundits claim Dune was set up for failure from the start, it did make a fair $402 million at the COVID-era box office on a budget of $165 million. And true, those are not the kind of tentpole blockbuster numbers that we come to expect from this kind of movie. But what I'm suggesting is that Dune, similar to the Spiderverse films, has gained staying power from streaming. The first movie comes out to a respectable box office run, but not any break-the-bank numbers. But then streaming comes along, and people discover the first film and like it so much that they feel they want this experience in a movie theater and are now anticipating the sequel so that they can get it, largely because of how easy it was for casual movie fans to conveniently experience the first film in their home either after or in this case during the box office run. And I don't think this excitement has gone away. Dune 2 is just around the corner, and I think it's fair to say that it is one of the most anticipated movies of the year. It's projected to be a major hit, both financially and critically. But I'm not suggesting that the entire reason for its success is because Dune Part 1 was streamed a lot of times. It comes down to accessibility, which is one of the most important elements of any 4-quadrant film, but I personally think especially science fiction movies. How easy is it for the average film fan to become invested in your story? And it's funny to think about because before this movie came out, Dune was known for 2 things. Number 1, a weird 80s David Lynch flick that, while being a cult sensation, never really found a mass audience. And number 2, being this insanely thick science fiction book. And of course, neither of these things really scream generally accessible mass appeal. And yet somehow, despite being a true example of dense science fiction in its purest form, Dune is a crowd pleaser. Dune is one of the coolest movies out there, and Dune 2 is likely a movie that your friends and your parents want to go see. One of my favorite things about Denis Villeneuve's Dune is how it handles the material. It's respectful of it, and by extension, it's respectful of its audience. The movie starts with an alien groan, a series of sounds you've never heard before. Then you're thrown into some of the most outlandish scenery you've ever seen on screen, full of people using words you don't recognize and talking about names and places that don't and can never exist. And the best thing about it is there is little to no explanation about any of it. You're just thrown in. But part of the magic of the movie is that you get it. The filmmakers are brave enough and smart enough to trust you, and we don't need full scenes where the cast explains to you what is happening. Nothing about this movie feels unrealized. And of course, this is Designing Hollywood, so I have to recognize the costume designer of Dune, Jacqueline West, who does an amazing job here, making every piece of clothing, every article of armor feel like it belongs in this world and is completely logical to what you're seeing on screen. And by the way, if you are impressed with Jacqueline West's work here and you want to learn more about it, we actually interviewed her on our Designing Hollywood podcast, where we got a great look into the behind the scenes of both this movie and many of her past projects. The film also owes a lot to the incredible direction by Denis Villeneuve, a one-of-a-kind science fiction filmmaker, as well as the stunning cinematography from Greg Fraser, who we also interviewed on the Designing Hollywood podcast. The artistic flavor and the aesthetic direction that these two artistic forces bring to Dune is, I believe, a big part of what has made it a long-lasting pop culture sensation. If you see an image from this movie, you know immediately that is Dune. It's instantly recognizable. This is an element that has brought staying power to many science fiction fantasy properties, including Harry Potter, Star Wars, and the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Similarly, I believe the cast could not be replaced by any other group of actors, because I was not a big Timothée Chalamet fan when I first saw this movie. Back then, I had only seen him in a handful of roles, including Lady Bird, where he plays a misguided love interest, and every time he shows up, he's reading a book. I'd also seen him in Call Me By Your Name, which is another very specific, very purposely immature performance. But this is the first movie I remember seeing where I thought Timothée Chalamet was masculine. And by the time the credits roll, you see a real potential action star in him. Although he begins the film as a boy going through growing pains and only just learning the world around him the same way we, the audience, are, by the end of the movie, you believe that he's going to be this unstoppable force who is the one chance of saving this desert planet. And that's a lot of range for one person to give within a single performance. It's almost like both sides of the movie are completely different ends of the spectrum on the type of person this character is. And all of that is owed to the way Timothée Chalamet both sees and understands this character. It's also a great narrative device that, as characters like the Duke, played by Oscar Isaacs, and Gurney, played by Josh Brolin, leave the story, you recognize Timothée Chalamet as the movie's adult lead at the same time as the people in Dune recognize him as an adult and a leader. And of course, the entire surrounding cast is perfect as well. Every supporting player feels like they belong in this world, from how they look to how they carry themselves. Even Zendaya, who took a lot of flack when the movie came out for being in all of the trailers, but in reality only briefly appearing largely to set up the sequel, feels like she's a natural part of Arrakis and that she's always been there, living in the desert, riding on sandworms. Similarly, when I look at Oscar Isaacs or Javier Bardem, I don't see Oscar Isaacs and Javier Bardem. I see leaders from the Fremen and members of the Atreides house. It all feeds into an effort from all angles to convince the audience that this is real. These are not performances. These are people who live in this reality. Because it feels very much like Fellowship of the Ring, where the movie is mainly concerned with introducing you to its characters and the world of the Shire, but is not overly concerned with rushing the story along, because the filmmakers are confident that that will come later. And if they simply respect their audience, they'll come along for the ride too. I believe that Dune and all of its sequels will continue to entertain science fiction and film fans for generations to come, and I'm so happy that I get to be one of them. Moreover, folks, I'm happy that you are here to celebrate movies like this with me. So if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it, hit that subscribe button, like this video, share it with your friends. And for Designing Hollywood, I'm Oliver Ricketts, your film critic, and until next time, get out there and go see a movie.